Good morning. My name is Dr. Larry Force, and I'm a professor of psychology at Mount St. Mary College, and also, along with my friend, Dr. and colleague, Dr. Jeffrey Kahana, we're directors of the Center on Aging and Disability Policy. We're here because of the fact we need to be here. We ended up 3 years ago receiving a grant from New York State DDPC, which is the Developmental Disability Planning Council, and it was to teach families mindfulness-based stress reduction. So families that have children with special needs, families that have older adults with special needs, the idea was to be able to use this curriculum that came out of Vanderbilt University. One of the things we did initially, probably my second phone call, was to Elaine Sproat, who has joined us as well today, to come in and really be the project director, to coordinate and facilitate, because that's her skill set, and she's done a wonderful job of that. So we go out the first year and we do small focus groups. Second year we do train the trainer venues, and then the world turns upside down. And as a result of that, we had all this content information, but we really didn't have a way to go about getting it out, because people were no longer assembling. So in talking with Lisa and Peggy, Peggy Pisano as school psychologist and advocate, and Lisa Nathan as parent and advocate and meditator, they came onto the grant about 7 months ago with the intent of interacting and exchanging with the school districts. Because the overarching thinking is, wouldn't it be wonderful if every IEP meeting started with a moment of meditation? That would really help reset the climate. But because of the fact that schools were, closed and everybody was learning from home, we started to think, how can we get this information out? So I talked with Peggy and Lisa, and what started out as an informal discussion, that we said that we would do this, get the information out, but it was never the intent that this was a town hall forum. I mean, we don't measure the impact of our reach by how many people attend on Wednesday, because it's artificial for us to assume that parents have the luxury of just pulling up with a cup of coffee and sit back and engage, in this exchange. The real power of this is in the distribution through our network and through other networks. And now with schools changing, their whole profile for the year, we've made a commitment to be available and continue this every Wednesday until the end of the school year. And it has received remarkable feedback, positive feedback from so many sources, and we're so appreciative of this. So Lisa and Peggy, I see the behind the scenes end of this thing, and they really work hard and are dedicated in coming up with topics and then engaging during the course of the week of what message they want to deliver. And then, creating, handouts that end up becoming attached to our email, as well as the e-newsletter that Elaine crafted. And I know that everyone's putting a lot of work in this. So the topic for this week is managing parent-guardian anger frustration. So with that, I'd like to turn this over to Lisa and Peggy and figure out who's going to start. I think, Peg, you're going to take the lead here.
Yes. So we talked about how anger and frustration kind of impacts the family system. And certainly in today's world, there's a lot of that, certainly frustration and maybe anger. So I did a little bit of research on, kind of both of those terms, and looked at some of the strategies that psychologists, social workers recommend for supporting that. And then Lisa will come in later on and talk about some of the mindfulness meditative strategies that can work as well. So for the purposes of the discussion, frustration is sort of underlying anger. So frustration is a feeling that comes when a person is blocked from doing something that they want or achieving a specific goal that they might want to achieve. And left unchecked, frustration sometimes leads to anger. So we're going to kind of put frustration aside and really focus on anger today. So basically, anger is a natural emotion that we all feel, and we all feel it to varying degrees. It means different things for different people, and we can express it differently too. Some people express anger, sort of internally, they get frustrated, they get sort of passive aggressive, if you will. They don't express it outwardly. And some people express it very significantly and outwardly. Anger is part of our wiring system. It's part of what makes us human beings. And in past years, lives, what have you, anger was a very beneficial kind of survival tactic. I'm not so sure in today's world it is, but certainly it was in prehistoric days, what have you. And anger is a natural, it's almost a secondary response, but it's a natural response to a feeling. And generally, things that underlie anger are anxiety, frustration, fear. And again, in today's world, parents may be short, or their tempers might be short, or because underneath that anger that they might be feeling or expressing is a fear of what's going to happen, or a fear of how are my children going to work through their schooling, or how are my children going to come out better at the end of this. So that, there's a lot of underlying fears that are associated with anger. And anger is expressed in different ways. It's a social expression, and it usually has to do with some other person or some other thing or some other activity that's making us feel this frustration and anger. Generally never appears in isolation. It's usually related to something, someone, some activity. And again, we experience it in varied ways. People can express it by lashing out. People can express it by closing down. People can express it by being sort of passive aggressive or manipulative towards others, maybe gossiping about other people. Those are all sort of expressions, if you will, of anger. And again, in varying kinds of degrees. Unchecked and uncontrolled, anger can have many physiological and emotional outcomes and consequences. And some of the physical outcomes can be a raise in blood pressure. It could be difficulty with, heart and just emotion, just feelings in general. And then some of the social emotional things are, sort of disharmony with your family or with your friends or your coworkers. So unchecked anger can have expansive kinds of difficulties. So, some of the research shows that psychologically, we can look at some of the ways to try to control and dissipate some of that anger. Probably, maybe one of the most difficult things, but probably the best thing that one can do early on is to get ahead of that anger, before it explodes, before it turns into something, to try to look at the warning signs in our lives that might create anger in us. So if, a parent comes home and the child always has a dirty room, or the child never finishes their homework that they have to do, sort of now at home, some of that invokes that feeling of anger. So if you kind of know that that's going to happen, then probably trying to get ahead of that, talking to yourself, trying to tell yourself, this is what I'm going to see, and so I need to change my reaction, perhaps. Also, trying to pause, and again, this is a difficult one, and think before one acts. There was an interesting saying that I got from the New York City Public Library, and it said, think before you speak and read before you think. And that's kind of a big one for anger. If you can think about what's happening and have that pause before you lash out, before you say something hurtful or have an angry response towards someone, then sometimes you can divert that anger. Anger can be, again, improved upon, dissipated by increasing communication skills. People have a tendency, I think, to say, it always happens this way, or it's never a good thing. And so if we can look at the way we speak to each other or to ourselves and try to get rid of some of those terms that are so broad, and try to reframe that a little bit and communicate to others and to ourselves differently, we can sometimes get ahead of that angry response. Using I statements is a pretty it's a technique that's used often to describe how you're feeling, and so that you're not always putting that information or that negativity onto someone else. So I feel as if you are doing, or whatever. And sometimes those increased communication skills change the culture of what's happening with whomever you're having the angry response. Try to understand the other person's perspective, especially for children. And again, in today's world, parents have an idea of how things should run or go, or in their own house, and children certainly have their own perspective of how things should happen. So, sometimes taking the other person's point of view and realizing that you're not always right, even though you feel that you are, getting in that space of somebody else might help you dissipate some of that anger. One of the things they said was really get some physical exercise, that it's very hard to be angry when you're sort of tired and you've moved around a lot. So if you feel that you are, a person that is tense or angry often, move around, get some physical activity into your life to kind of dissipate some of that energy, if you will. One of the other things they talked about is just change, they called it change the channel. And what that means is if you come in and you're feeling angry because you see something, try to go away from that. Try to, as best possible, move from that environment and put yourself in a different position. It's almost like a timeout, but a positive timeout for parents and caregivers. Sometimes if you move away from the activity, whatever it is that's creating that angst for you, you feel that you can look at it, you can think about it, you're taking that pause and you're getting out of that environment into a, maybe a more positive one. And then reward yourself, for doing a better job at controlling that anger. Reward yourself for, understanding all the things that led to the anger, and reward yourself for changing your behavior. Because again, we talk about behavior change for children, but parents, need to change sometimes too. And so whatever that means for you, some kind of self gratification, just talking to yourself about how I did a better job this time, holding on, getting rid of that anger and changing my behavior. And then finally, one of the other things that I thought was kind of interesting and probably would lead into what Lisa wants to talk about is that, you create a calm, and we talked last time about a sanctuary. So, you're creating a calming environment. It could be an auditory place, it could be a visual place, it could be a place that has candles or smells, but, try to find a place that is calming for you. In the face of that anger. It could be that sanctuary that we talked about last time, and use it if at all possible. So, those are some of the techniques. There are certainly more that psychologists and social workers, talk about in terms of dissipating some of that anger. Some of these are easier said than done, certainly, but I think some would be effective, especially in today's environment where our tensions are high and our frustrations are high. And so we may be quicker to respond in an angry way than we would normally do. So Lisa.
Before Lisa goes, I just want to say that the benefit of this exchange is that, in reading the notes that led up to this discussion, one of my comments was I really love the fact that you termed something called the calm down kit. It's almost like a lunch box, having these tools that are available, because of the fact that, it is a changing world for all of us, and I really like the fact that you referenced that not only is it a changing world for the parent, but it's a changing world for the child. And the child has a perspective of how they think things should be done. But I want to go back to that calm down kit. You talked about things that you smell that you find, calming, things that you touch, you see, something to engage the senses, where, Lisa's fingerprints are all over this because of the fact that she always, embeds, an experience of what it's like, a practice experience. So really, thanks. And this is really, it's almost like a how-to. You know, you call it behavioral approach. You know, if you weren't in the field and you wanted to know what is it, what's the message, you're giving like step-by-step strategies, suggestions of how to make these changes. Not just it's you should make a change, but here are some strategies. So really, really a great job with this content.
And some of the strategies will work for some people and not for others. So again, it's diverse and people are diverse. So and anger is expressed in many different ways. So you know, it's good to try some different things. I think the biggest thing is to kind of try to think about where is the anger coming from? What is the underlying issue? And try to take a pause and think about that and maybe try to divert it and change it into a more positive outcome.
Good stuff. Lisa?
Hey, hi everybody. Good morning. Yeah, Peggy, some of that, I mean, it points exactly to what I'm going to say. And, you know, anger is a really big one. You know, I found lots and lots and lots of notes and info on this. So, you know, you mentioned, Peggy, anger is part of our wiring and it's essential. It's an essential emotion. But it's destructive when it hijacks us, sort of like the alien creature, you know, kind of grabbing on and not letting go. We all know the feeling of being consumed by anger and of finding it hard to let go. And the question becomes like, how is it possible to switch from that reactivity to a more constructive response? And I want to talk a little bit more into that. When we go into anger mode, we go into a fight or flight response. And our thinking conscious brain gets shut down. It's like the steel wall comes down between that reaction and our prefrontal cortex, where we have, you know, where we can gather more of our consciousness. So say something happens to you, you get criticized, you're slandered behind your back, somebody says something on social media that's nasty, you're betrayed by a family member or a friend. Like, what happens? What happens in your mind and body? Do you instantly go into that blame, that defensive mode, that resentment? Do you lash out at them? Do you start, like, you know, answering on, you know, Facebook or, you know, or calling them, or do you keep it all inside? And then do you start going on the endless loop in your head, repeating the incident over and over again, like on the cinema screen in your mind? Does it become, do you play it back? Do you say, oh, I could have said this, I could have said that? And once that starts, it can be very difficult to stop it. And literally you could go for weeks, months, or years playing the same scenario, something that made you angry, and keep it inside. And when we start telling those stories, then our ego holds on to them as like a survival mode. And it makes it very, very difficult to let go. And we know how difficult it can be to let go of anger. All right, so meditation. So how can meditation help with this? As we know, meditation makes us more aware of our thinking patterns. It kind of makes you more of an observer on that mental screen you have inside. So you could develop bringing that space, like you said, Peggy, that pause between the sparking incident and your reaction. And I really want to emphasize that pause could be a microsecond. It's not this giant, like, you know, revelation with, you know, angel singing. It's just going to be a microsecond of pause that gives you the ability to reconnect with that conscious part of your brain, the thinking, rational part of your brain. So, all right, so what do? So you feel the anger coming on. You want to try to pause. No matter what, like you said, you want to pause. If you're activated, there's no way to create a new neural pathway into a new pattern of response. Okay. So this may seem very contrary, but when you pause, then you kind of want to make a U-turn. you want to come right back into your body and examine what's going on inside. And as you also brought up, you want to try to understand what the unmet need is. Anger comes from unmet need. So what is that unmet need that triggered the anger in the first place? But when the anger comes up, you want to honor it. You want to accept it. You're not trying to change it. You know, this society tells us to repress it, to push it back. You want to just sit with it. You want to honor it, feel it, and be aware of it, but trying not to let it burn us up. And that's the kind of skill you can achieve through emotional regulation and meditation. And are you always going to be able to do this? No, especially in the beginning. Sometimes you're just not going to be able to pause, but you can do your best to forgive it and try to understand what happened. And it, you know, it's helpful to start small. You know, not when you're, you know, this giant situation is happening, you get so angry, you're not going to be able to sit and kind of, you know, put the pause button on and do the U-turn. So you start small, being irritated by something. Your kids are fighting. The store is out of eggs. You know, a package that you expected didn't get delivered. You know, being stuck in traffic. I mean, the car is a big one for me. I'm like the most even-tempered person most of the time, but my kids like laugh at me because in the car I become like this demon sometimes. I mean, I grew up in Brooklyn, okay? I learned to drive in the city. So, you know, it brings out a little bit of the Brooklyn in me. But so just you can do little things to find that pause. So you want to start with something small, not something major. All right. Now, I'm not going to go into a full meditation on anger because we're not angry right now. We're sitting here, we're like really mellow, really chill. It's lovely. So, but the idea is to connect to your breath. We always start with connecting to our breath, a few calming breaths in through your nose, out through your mouth, and grounding. It's always about the grounding coming into your body. And you want to really kind of examine, how does the anger make you feel? And you may not really be used to doing this at all. This may be really like a first for you. Check on your breath. Is your breathing shallow? Is your breathing rapid? Do you feel any constriction or pain or tightness anywhere in your body? Do you feel heat? Does the anger have a shape? Does it have a color? And you want to accept the feeling of anger. You don't want to make it go away. You don't think, and you don't want to think about the incident. You don't want to judge it. You're not thinking about what happened. You're seeing how it makes you feel in your body. You don't want to get wrapped up in the story. Just notice how the anger makes you feel. Always come back and connect to your breath. And you know, the goal is to create space between you and those feelings of anger during this meditation. The goal is to be able to observe the physiological changes in your body and mind when you get triggered, so you'll be able to control your response without getting overtaken by those feelings of anger. It's easier said than done, but I'll say it over and over again. This is a practice. That's why you want to start on something small. And hopefully you'll feel the anger dissipating. And you'll feel like that disconnection from that rage or from those emotions. And take, you know, a few more breaths and give yourself some gratitude and a little bit of love and compassion for taking the time to do this. And you can develop some really, really great skills doing this. But again, start small, don't judge. Just all we can do is try. All right, so I was thinking a lot about this and the idea of forgiveness, because forgiveness is a really, really big, there's a lot to forgiveness and it's very, very complicated. And so I thought what I would do is bring in a meditation called loving kindness meditation. And this is a Buddhist tradition that goes back thousands of years. So I thought we could do that because it's a way of bringing, and this is not to do when you're angry. This is just a meditation to do that's another practice to learn. So it connects you to your compassion, to loving kindness to yourself and to others, which could really help you not get angry in the first place. So we're going to do this. We're going to take a moment. We're going to settle in, shift around if you have to. Feet on the floor. And this is always like so hard for me because doing this here, like, so one thing, sitting in my sunroom and, doing this, but it's like, okay, I gotta do this here, but it's just me. It's me here right now. And taking in some breaths in through your nose, out through your mouth. And eventually settling. Feeling connected in your body. Accepting whatever is there. But you're not judging how you feel. You're just observing how you feel. I want you to bring to mind someone you love unconditionally, someone who loves you. It could be a person now, in the past. It could be a pet. It could be how you want to feel loved. You just want to evoke the feelings of how they make you feel or how you feel from their love. You're bringing the feeling, you're working in your body, in your heart. You could even place your hand on your heart. You're bringing in those feelings from your heart. You want to rest in the warmth and the radiance that the love brings to you. Now you can bring that feeling of love to yourself. Accept the feeling of love just as you are. Now this could feel very difficult, very awkward. I know I've expressed that when I started this, I couldn't even come to this place of feeling love for myself. So you want to bring to your mind the words, may I be peaceful, may I be healthy, may I open to life just as it is. May I open to giving and receiving love. And this you can create like a little mantra in your mind. A mantra or just any words that you repeat over and over as your focus. And if these words don't resonate to you, make up your own. May I be peaceful. May I be healthy. May I open to life just as it is. May I open to giving and receiving love. Remember, you're connecting to your heart. And just take a moment to pause. Bring those feelings of love. Feel the warmth. Thank yourself for sitting and taking a moment to pause and do this for yourself. Okay, and thank you.
You know, the two of you, you know, have just, you know, hit this out of the park today. I'm not kidding you, from the behavioral perspective and from the meditation perspective. You know, and I think, you know, there's a new language that's now evolved. So social distancing, we had no idea what that even meant 6 months ago. And now there's not a day or a moment in a day that we're not hearing it or practicing it. And, you know, words bring on language and image. And as you were talking at the beginning, I was thinking, I think one of the things that we can integrate here, there's a guy up in, a doc from Harvard up in Utica, New York, named Bill Thomas. And he created this project called the Eden Project. So he's running around the country. He's created a cottage industry. He's running around the country, yelling at nursing homes to tear down their walls and build small group homes. So when this first came out a number of years ago, before downloadable links and everything, I looked at the video and I called him and I said, wonderful. He has 2 children that are severely disabled. He's in it. He's in it full time. And I said, it was so poignant. The PBS did a profile of him. I said, but can I ask you something, Doc? I said, it looks like the group homes that at that point it was called OMRDD, now OPWDD, Office for Persons with Developmental Disabilities. I said, the model that you're really advocating for looks like the group homes that are in existence. He says, I am. That is the model. But he's bringing it into a different arena, into aging, you know, tear down the walls of nursing homes. So he's created a language all to itself. So therapy aids are not referred to as therapy aids, they're referred to as shabazes. And then he creates a whole climate. And you use the word meditation. And we're dealing with interesting, unique, difficult, devastating times right now. And families are home with children. And as you said, you know, it's wonderful, Lisa, you said this, it's wonderful that schools are reaching out, but my child's never going to sit in front of a computer. And I hear this from Jeffrey, I hear this from other friends that have children with special needs, that it's wonderful, but it's not the medium. And then we show up and we say, well, you should learn mindfulness and you should learn, you know, how to meditate. And maybe we have to introduce a new word, because you kept referring to pause or micro. Because when people think of the word meditate, they think of the lotus position in a quiet room, 45 minutes, and that's not happening, okay, in many arenas. So maybe the terminology that we start to embed in our discussion is this concept of micro pause or micro meditation, that it can happen in an instant. It can happen. I was talking yesterday with someone and they were talking about that they really love this platform and they want the link for it because they're going to send it out nationwide. And they said that, you know, even though that we're in New York and we're funded by New York, mindfulness is something that occurs everywhere. And then we started to talk that mindfulness really is only attached to one thing, and that's your feet. It can happen at any time. Doesn't mean that it doesn't mean you have to be in a lotus position. So when you're teaching the strategies of people getting, you know, stopping in the moment. You know, years ago, I went up to the Cape Cod Institute and attended this thing by Ron Siegel. He's Dan Siegel's brother, big mindfulness, you know, gurus. And the name of the week-long conference was Using Mindfulness as a Therapeutic Intervention. And he's standing up there and he's talking about mindfulness. And I started to smile a little bit because he's talking about staying in the moment. He's talking about, you know, pausing. And in the fellowship world, they've always talked about a day at a time. You know, you can restart the day. You don't have to forecast a future that has calamity and chaos in it. You can restart the day. Yesterday morning, you know, I got up and I really wasn't in sync. And I knew that I wasn't in sync. And I stopped myself and said, you're not in sync, but it doesn't mean that's the way the rest of the day is going to go. And I was able to change it by pausing, by doing what you have recommended. And the next thing I know, I had one of the most productive days I've had, you know, in 4 weeks, because I got back in the zone. So maybe what we really need to talk about is this, not necessarily today, but we build in this language of micro pause or micro meditation. You know, I think that might be something that we can really benefit from. So thank you, Peggy, and thank you, Lisa.